You're standing in the dry, cracked soil of Xi'an, China. The sun is low. The ground beneath your boots holds more than just dust. It holds a secret, 2,000 years in the making. In 1974, a group of farmers digging a simple well stumbled on something that would rewrite history textbooks. At first, they thought they'd hit a piece of old pottery, maybe an urn, or a shard from the Han Dynasty. But what they uncovered was far more than a relic. It was a soldier. Life-sized. Silent. Then they found another. And another. Until it became clear, this wasn't a burial site. It was an army. Frozen in time. Crafted from clay. A military force created not to fight, but to guard. The Terracotta Army. Over 8,000 individual soldiers. Every one of them unique. Faces carved with precision, hairstyles varying by rank, armor engraved with chilling accuracy. Each holding real bronze weapons, positioned in formations as if ready to march, not into battle, but into eternity. But here's where it gets interesting. These soldiers were just the surface. Literally. Because beneath them lies something far more mysterious. The tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unite all of China, a man obsessed with immortality, power, and control. And to this day, that tomb remains sealed. Because ancient writings speak of rivers of mercury, traps rigged with crossbows, a subterranean palace designed to mirror the cosmos. Scientists at China's University of Geosciences detected unusually high levels of mercury in the surrounding soil. Coincidence or confirmation? Now think about this. This all happened over 2,200 years ago. Before the birth of Julius Caesar. Before the Great Wall snaked across the mountains. While Europe still lived in tribal chaos, China had already built an empire so advanced it crafted armies out of earth. So here's the question. What kind of man creates an immortal army? What was he afraid of? Or what was he trying to protect? In this journey, we're going to unearth the truth, not just about the Terracotta Army, but about the dynasties, inventions, and revolutions that shaped one of the world's greatest civilizations. From the brutal rule of the Qin to the intellectual heights of the Han, from ancient robotics to global trade routes that predated Columbus, and into the still unopened tomb that might just be the biggest archaeological bombshell of the century. Welcome to the Forgotten Empire. This is the story of the Chinese dynasties and the secrets they left behind. Go ahead and press red subscribe button and turn on notifications for more updates.
Before China was China, it was war. Imagine a land torn into 7 kingdoms, each locked in a savage struggle for dominance. For centuries, the land that we now call China was a chessboard of feudal lords, backstabbing alliances, and endless war. This era, known as the Warring States period, was chaos incarnate. But from this chaos rose a storm. In the western state of Qin, pronounced Qin, a young prince named Zhang would do what no ruler had ever done. By the time he was just 13 years old, he was crowned king. By 22, he was crushing enemy states with terrifying efficiency. And by 38, he was emperor, the first. He renamed himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin. And that word, Qin, is where we get the name China. Now let's step into his world. Qin Shi Huang didn't just win battles. He waged war on division itself. He standardized weights, measures, currency, and even writing. Imagine trying to unite a country the size of modern-day Europe with 7 different languages and systems of government. He crushed that chaos under a single system. One law, one empire. But unity came at a price. His philosophy was legalism, a brutally strict doctrine that believed humans are naturally selfish, and only fear can keep them in line. Disobedience wasn't punished. It was erased. Historical records from the Han Dynasty, especially the grand historian Sima Qian, describe public executions, forced labor, mass surveillance. Thousands of scholars were allegedly buried alive or burned with their texts for daring to question authority. Burn the books. Bury the scholars. Camera zooms in on a clay tablet. Cut to flickering flames consuming ancient texts. But here's the twist. What Qin Shi Huang destroyed, he also protected. He built massive infrastructure projects, the most famous being the first unification of fortifications that would become the Great Wall of China. Over 300,000 workers labored under lethal conditions. Many of them died where they stood, their bodies allegedly buried within the wall itself. And yet, despite the cruelty, he delivered something rare in human history: order. For the first time in centuries, China was not a collection of warlords, but a single state with a single vision. Qin Shi Huang created the foundation of the Chinese imperial system that would last over 2,000 years. His rule was brutal, but effective. In many ways, he was China's Napoleon, except he succeeded. But Qin Shi Huang was not content with conquering the world of the living. His true obsession was death. He feared it, fought it, tried to outweed it. His royal physicians fed him mercury pills, believing they held the secret to eternal life. Ironically, these elixirs may have slowly poisoned his body and warped his mind. He ordered expeditions to find the mythical islands of the immortals, voyages into uncharted seas that never returned. And meanwhile, beneath his capital Xi'an, he built a tomb. Not just any tomb, a city-sized necropolis filled with treasures, traps, and most famously, an army of clay soldiers to defend him in the afterlife. The Terracotta Army was not a monument. It was a military deployment into eternity. Archaeologists from the Shaanxi Provincial Institute of Archaeology have worked tirelessly since the site's discovery in the 1970s. They've uncovered bronze chariots, intricate weapons, and full command formations buried underground. Every warrior sculpted differently, eyebrows, eyes, mustaches, each modeled on real soldiers of the day. Dr. Yuan Zhongyi, the original director of the excavation, once said, "It is the most significant archaeological find of the 20th century. But what lies deeper, we still do not know, because the emperor's tomb itself, the heart of it all, remains untouched." Why? Because ancient texts describe rivers of liquid mercury flowing through the underground chambers, designed to mimic the stars above and the rivers below. When modern researchers tested the soil near the tomb, they found mercury concentrations over 100 times the normal level. It was not a myth. The warnings were real. Even today, technology may not be advanced enough to excavate without risking collapse or triggering ancient traps. So now ask yourself, what kind of man builds an empire with one hand and a sealed tomb with the other? Was Qin Shi Huang a visionary or a madman, a builder of nations or a tyrant with godlike delusions? And more importantly, what else lies buried beneath our feet? Imagine walking into a chamber where 8,000 warriors stand motionless, shoulder to shoulder, staring straight ahead. You can almost hear the sound of war drums echoing off the cavern walls. The air is dry, the silence total. But these are no ordinary soldiers. They are made of clay, not carved from stone, not cast from bronze, but carefully molded, hand-sculpted, and painted over 2,200 years ago. And for centuries, they stood in darkness, guarding their emperor in eternal vigilance. This is the Terracotta Army, a burial secret so elaborate, so precise, that even in our age of satellites and AI, we've barely scratched the surface of its mystery. It started with a shovel. March 1974, Lintong County, Shaanxi Province. A team of farmers was digging a well near Mount Li when one of them, Yang Jifa, struck what he thought was a broken piece of pottery. But as they dug further, the fragments revealed a human form, then armor, weapons, and finally, an entire soldier. The authorities were called, then archaeologists, then the government. Within weeks, it became clear. This was not a burial pit. It was an entire underground army, and they hadn't been seen in over 2 millennia. Cut to an aerial view of Pit 1, the largest excavation site. Today, what we call the Terracotta Army is spread across 3 main pits, covering over 20,000 square meters. That's roughly the size of 3 football fields, filled with soldiers, horses, archers, generals, and chariots. Every one of them is unique. The facial features, hairstyles, armor patterns, no two are alike. Archaeologists believe thousands of artisans worked in vast production lines, using a modular system to sculpt body parts that were then assembled like clay Legos, torsos, legs, heads, arms, customized just enough to appear individual. It was mass production 2,000 years before Henry Ford. But this wasn't just a grave decoration. This was a military formation. Pit 1 houses the main army, infantry and chariots in tight rows, facing east toward the lands the emperor once conquered. Pit 2 contains elite troops, archers, cavalry, and command units. Pit 3, a mysterious command center, possibly the HQ of the Afterlife Army. There were real weapons too, crossbows, spears, swords, many coated in a chromium-based anti-corrosion layer that kept them sharp for centuries. This technique baffled modern scientists when first discovered. Some even thought it was lost Nazi tech before realizing, no, the Qin did it first. Insert quote. Professor Duan Qingba, chief archaeologist of the site. This was not just burial art. It was a fully realized military doctrine in clay. Emperor Qin Shi Huang believed he needed to defend his reign even in death. Now, let's talk about the science behind the mystery. In the late 1990s, researchers at the Emperor Qin Shi Huang's Mausoleum Site Museum began mapping the layout using ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and resistivity imaging. What they found was shocking. A massive palace-like tomb mound, yet sealed and untouched. Underground walls forming a city grid. Evidence of metallic elements and unusual topography beneath the tomb chamber. The most spine-tingling discovery? Mercury. Soil samples from around the tomb show mercury concentrations as high as 1,440 parts per billion, up to 100 times the natural level. This aligns perfectly with ancient records from the Han Dynasty historian Sima Qian, who wrote, "The tomb was built to represent the universe. Rivers of mercury flowed through copper mountains beneath a sky of stars." Some believe the mercury was used symbolically, to replicate rivers and oceans in the emperor's imagined afterlife. Others suspect it was a defense mechanism, a toxic moat meant to deter tomb raiders. And so far, it's worked. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang remains unopened. No archaeologist has dared to breach it. But even above ground, the terracotta army keeps revealing secrets. In 2007, researchers used hyperspectral imaging to examine traces of ancient paint. Turns out, the warriors weren't just earthen gray. They were once vibrantly painted in reds, blues, purples, and greens. Unfortunately, when exposed to modern air, the pigments flake off within minutes. This has forced scientists to slow excavation efforts. Teams from the German Archaeological Institute and China's Northwest University are now collaborating on techniques to preserve pigment in oxygen-controlled microenvironments. Until they succeed, much of the army will remain buried, protected by time. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. In 2020, a fourth pit, previously believed to be empty, was reclassified after new findings. Burn marks and scattered debris suggest it may have been deliberately sabotaged. Was there a rebellion after the emperor's death? Was someone trying to destroy the army from within? Historians now believe that within just 4 years of Qin Shi Huang's death, the empire fell into civil war. His dynasty, the one he built brick by brick, body by body, lasted only 15 years. And yet, his army still stands. So now let's take a step back. Why build an army for the afterlife? Was it fear, ego, superstition, all three? Or was it something deeper, a belief that death was just another kingdom, one that needed to be ruled, defended, and governed like the world above? Maybe the terracotta army isn't just about immortality. Maybe it's about control. Let's play a game. What do paper, the compass, gunpowder, and printing all have in common? You might say technology, or revolutions, or even Europe. But here's the twist, they all came from ancient China. Centuries, in some cases 1,000 years, before the Western world even knew such things were possible. By the time of the Han Dynasty, roughly 200 BCE to 220 CE, China wasn't just an empire. It was an engine of innovation. Let's start with something deceptively simple, but world-changing. Invented around 105 CE by Kai Luan, a court official of the Han Dynasty, paper was made from mulberry bark, old rags, hemp, and fishing nets, all mashed into pulp and dried into sheets. Before paper, the Chinese wrote on silk, expensive, or bamboo strips, heavy and cumbersome. Paper revolutionized bureaucracy, literature, communication, and later religion, and it stayed in China for over 500 years before spreading west. Fun fact, when Arab traders finally acquired the method after the Battle of Talas in 751 CE, they were so impressed, they built entire paper mills in Samarkand. Now picture this. It's the year 200 BCE, and Chinese navigators are already using lodestones, naturally magnetized iron ores, to point south. By the 11th century, this evolved into the floating magnetic compass, helping sailors steer through open seas. Europe wouldn't adopt the magnetic compass until the 13th century. Modern relevance? Without it, there'd be no age of exploration, no trade routes, no GPS. China was navigating the unknown long before Columbus ever glimpsed the ocean. Invented during the Tang Dynasty, 9th century CE, but based on centuries of earlier alchemy experiments, gunpowder was first created by Taoist monks searching for the elixir of life. Ironically, what they discovered would go on to fuel death. The earliest recipes called for saltpeter, potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal. Ancient military treatises like the Wujing Zongyao from 1044 described fire arrows, flame-spitting lances, and exploding grenades. But here's the kicker, it wasn't used for world domination. At least not by the Chinese. They treated it cautiously, almost spiritually. It was the West that turned it into empire fuel. Before Gutenberg's press in the 15th century, Chinese printers were already producing mass texts in the Tang Dynasty, around 700 CE, using woodblock printing. That's 800 years earlier. Then, in 1040, Bai Shang invented movable clay type. He created thousands of reusable characters carved from ceramic, an astonishingly modern concept. Although limited by the complexity of Chinese script, it laid the foundation for mass communication, civil service exams, and cultural cohesion. Imagine this, before European kings even dreamed of literacy for the masses, Chinese peasants were printing Buddhist sutras by hand. It's a staggering thought. And yet, many of these innovations stayed bottled within China due to geography, politics, and cultural values that prioritize stability over expansion. But that didn't mean progress stopped. Seismograph, Zhonghang, 132 CE, a bronze vessel with dragon heads that dropped metal balls to indicate the direction of distant earthquakes. An early warning system 1,800 years before modern tech. Deep drilling technology, Han Dynasty to extract natural gas and salt brine. Drills descended over 1,000 meters, used with bamboo piping systems. Iron suspension bridges, hundreds of years before the West. Mechanical clocks powered by water and gear systems. Even toilet paper, yes, even that, was first recorded during the Tang Dynasty in 6th century China. You may wonder, how did ancient Chinese thinkers get so far ahead? The answer lies in their worldview. Unlike in many Western traditions, Chinese innovation wasn't seen as rebellion against nature. It was seen as harmony with it. They observed wind, water, earth, and then built machines to cooperate with these forces. And innovation wasn't the domain of lone geniuses. It was state-sponsored, scholar-driven, and deeply embedded in Confucian bureaucracy. Institutions like the Hanlin Academy and state workshops created a feedback loop where engineers, artisans, and philosophers collaborated. Western historians are only now appreciating the technological golden age of ancient China. It's not that China was behind Europe. It was often far ahead. When these inventions finally reached the rest of the world, they sparked revolutions. Paper made education scalable. Gunpowder changed warfare forever. Printing led to mass literacy. The compass opened oceans and connected continents. These weren't just Chinese inventions. They were civilizational gifts. And yet, despite their brilliance, much of the West remained unaware for centuries. So ask yourself, what else has history buried? What other inventions, ideas, or truths lie waiting beneath the soil, just like the terracotta army? Because the past isn't a museum. It's a vault. And it's only just begun to open. When the dust of the Qin dynasty finally settled, the world held its breath. The first emperor was dead, his tomb sealed, his dynasty gone, collapsed after just 15 years. What came next was not another tyrant, not more chaos, but something truly rare in the ancient world. A time of stability, science, and soul. The Han Dynasty. If Qin forged the body of China, Han created its heart. So much so that even today, 2,000 years later, the majority of Chinese people refer to themselves as Han Chinese. It all began with an unlikely hero, Liu Bang, a former peasant and minor official. He wasn't born into power, he seized it, defeating powerful warlords and rising to become Emperor Gaozu, founder of the Han. Unlike Qin Shi Huang, Liu Bang didn't rule by fear. He ruled by balance. He blended Confucian ideals, emphasizing morality, family, and benevolence, with legalist control where needed. The result? A state that enforced law but valued wisdom. Cut to modern-day Chang'an excavation site. Archaeologists brush dust from a silk scroll. This shift wasn't just philosophical. It transformed society. Confucian scholars were invited into court. Education was prioritized. A national civil service was born, an early meritocracy, where promotion came through exams, not bloodlines. In a world where emperors ruled by divine right, the Han offered something revolutionary: competence over privilege. Under the Han, the state became an organism, not just a tool of the emperor. Collected taxes, drafted soldiers, surveyed land, built canals, codified law. Bureaucrats, trained in literature, ethics, history, ran this system with stunning efficiency. Even the West wouldn't develop something similar until over 1,000 years later. The Han didn't just build inward, they looked outward. At its height, the dynasty stretched from the Korean peninsula in the east to the edge of Afghanistan in the west. Through war and diplomacy, they opened the door to a new kind of empire, one that didn't just conquer land but connected worlds. This was the beginning of the Silk Road. Established under Emperor Wu of Han, r. 141 to 87 BCE, the Silk Road became a highway of civilizations. Goods flowed outward: silk, jade, porcelain, and inward: horses, glassware, spices, and ideas. It wasn't just trade. It was transformation. Buddhism came to China via this route. So did Persian music, Indian astronomy, and Roman glass. Imagine a merchant arriving in Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, and seeing woodblock-printed texts, mechanical clocks, and polished Confucian schools. It must have felt like stepping into the future. Of course, no dynasty escapes the weight of time. As the Han grew, so did corruption, favoritism, and inequality. Eunuchs gained political power. Peasant taxes soared. Famine spread in the countryside. By the 2nd century CE, revolts began to simmer, most notably the Yellow Turban Rebellion in 184 CE, led by Taoist mystics claiming divine prophecy. The rebellion shook the empire to its core and helped trigger the Han's decline. And yet, for over 400 years, the Han dynasty stood. Its collapse was not a fall, but a transformation. The values it birthed, Confucian ethics, centralized bureaucracy, civil service, would echo across China for 2,000 years. Every dynasty after would borrow its blueprint: the Tang, the Song. Even modern China draws identity from the Han. So if you want to understand China, you don't look at just the walls or the soldiers or the tombs. You look at the Han. And you see not just an empire, but a philosophy in motion. Imagine this: you're standing at the mouth of a desert city. Camels shuffle past, heavy with cargo. Silk shimmering in the sunlight, bundles of fragrant cinnamon and cloves wafting through the dry wind, and scrolls containing philosophies that haven't yet reached the West. This isn't just a trade route. It's the internet of the ancient world. And at its heart, China. More specifically, the Han dynasty, whose global ambitions transformed what we now call the Silk Road from dusty trails into veins of cultural, economic, and diplomatic lifeblood that connected the ancient world, from Xi'an all the way to Rome. But how did a single Chinese dynasty achieve this? Let's rewind. It began with Emperor Wu of Han around 138 BCE. Tired of endless raids from northern tribes like the Xiongnu, he sent one man, a diplomat and explorer named Zhang Qian, on a mission westward. Officially, he was to seek alliances. Unofficially, he stumbled upon something that would change world history: Zhang Qian returned years later, sunburned, emaciated, and nearly executed for vanishing, but brought stories of vast empires beyond the horizon. Central Asia wasn't some wasteland. It was a goldmine of horses, jade, glass, grapes, and people willing to trade. And with that, the Chinese opened the gate. The Silk Road, or more accurately, a vast network of overland and maritime trade routes, came alive. Now picture the scene. Xi'an, then called Chang'an, becomes a hub, the New York City of the ancient East. Caravans set out loaded with silk, lacquerware, bamboo books, and porcelain. In return, gold, silver, wool, ivory, and exotic animals pour in from India, Persia, Mesopotamia, even as far as the Mediterranean. Recent excavations led by Dr. Wang Jianhua at the Naya ruins in Xinjiang uncovered Roman glassware buried alongside Han-era coins. Physical proof that worlds apart were brushing against one another, sharing not just goods, but ideas. Archaeologist Louise Hildebrandt from the University of Bonn explains, "What's remarkable is how early cultural hybridization appears. We see Greco-Roman designs blended into Chinese pottery motifs. It's not just trade, it's integration. But here's where it gets interesting. The Silk Road didn't just move products. It moved beliefs. Buddhism entered China not through conquest, but through conversation. Monks from India journeyed through the Taklamakan Desert, translating Sanskrit scrolls into Chinese script. By the 1st century CE, Buddhist monasteries popped up along the route like rest stops, offering travelers not just shelter, but spiritual refuge. Even today, in the Mogeo caves near Dunhuang, you can see their legacy. Hundreds of grottos carved into cliffs, painted with tales from the Jataka, the Buddha's past lives, dating back to the 4th century. Meanwhile, diseases also found passage. Experts believe smallpox and possibly the earliest strains of the plague migrated eastward, a chilling reminder that globalization has always carried risks. But perhaps the most overlooked travelers on this ancient freeway, languages and ideas. You'd find Greek inscriptions in Pakistan, Sanskrit scrolls in Chinese cities, Nestorian Christian texts preserved in Chinese script. The world was colliding, and they knew it. The question is, how do we know all this? Much of what we know about these ancient connections comes from layered scientific efforts. Isotope analysis of camel bones reveals their migration patterns, confirming long-distance travel routes. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have traced long-buried trade roads beneath the Gobi Desert. AI-enhanced translation software is helping decode multilingual manuscripts found in ancient way stations like Turfan and Khotan. In 2017, a joint expedition between the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Oxford University revealed a stash of Roman coins deep in western China, some dating to the reign of Marcus Aurelius. A freak trade incident, or evidence of sustained contact? As historian Dr. Michael McCormick puts it, the Han didn't just build walls to keep the world out. They built roads to let the world in. Fast forward to today. China's Belt and Road Initiative is a modern echo of the Han's ancient ambition, rebuilding the Silk Road in steel and fiber optics. Even Xi'an, once the origin of those camel caravans, is now a launchpad for high-speed trains delivering tech, textiles, and machines to Europe in days, not years. The legacy is undeniable. The Silk Road didn't just link places. It reshaped cultures. It seeded religions. It rewired economies. And it made China not just a kingdom but a connector of worlds. Yet here's a lingering mystery. Did the Han see themselves as globalizers? Or were they merely protecting borders? Some texts suggest a sense of superiority, a Middle Kingdom worldview. Others, especially recently unearthed scrolls in Gansu province, hint at envy and admiration for the exotic wonders arriving from the West. So were they conquerors, curators, collaborators, or all three? The Silk Road didn't give us clear answers, but it did leave clues, scattered across sands and scrolls, whispering of an ancient world far more connected than we ever imagined. It wasn't just a road. It was an artery, pulsing with gold, spices, silk, and ideas that would ripple through history for millennia. Imagine standing on a wind-beaten outpost in ancient Dunhuang, western China. The sky blazes orange as the sun slips behind the desert dunes. Below, a caravan of camels moves like a snake across the sands, their backs loaded with precious silk, scrolls, and spices. The sound of bells and murmurs in dozens of languages rise into the dusk. Welcome to the Silk Road, the original superhighway of globalization, and one of the most extraordinary achievements of the Qin and Han dynasties. But how did it begin? While the name Silk Road wouldn't be coined until the 19th century by German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen, its roots go all the way back to the Han dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE. Under Emperor Wu of Han, a bold mission was launched to connect China with the mysterious lands to the west. A young envoy, Zhang Qian, was sent out not for trade, but for diplomacy. He would spend over 13 years in foreign lands, imprisoned, escaping, learning. And when he returned, he brought something far more valuable than any commodity: knowledge. From exotic horses of Fergana to the grapevines of Central Asia, China's leaders realized that the world was far richer and closer than they had ever imagined. And so the Silk Road was born. Contrary to what many believe, the Silk Road wasn't a single road. It was a vast network of interlinking routes stretching over 4,000 miles, connecting Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, to the Mediterranean. Goods didn't travel end-to-end. Instead, they passed through middlemen, merchants, and desert nomads, each adding a markup, a story, a touch of mystery. Silk from China, spices from India, glassware from Rome, paper, jade, gunpowder, Buddhism. Yes, ideas traveled too. Even plague, some historians believe, piggybacked on this route centuries later. But how did they do it? Traveling these routes wasn't a casual stroll. Merchants endured sandstorms, bandits, and frostbite crossing the Taklamakan Desert and the Pamir Mountains, also known as the Roof of the World. Navigation relied on celestial patterns, well-documented waypoints, and ancient traveler maps. Chinese technological innovations made this easier. Paper improved documentation and contracts. Compasses, developed by the Han, offered navigation tools centuries ahead of Europe. Camels, especially the Bactrian variety, revolutionized desert travel, capable of carrying 300 pounds across barren terrain. What's more awe-inspiring than material exchange is the cultural osmosis that occurred. Along the road, Buddhist monks from India brought teachings, which were translated into Chinese and adopted throughout the empire. The Mogeo caves in Dunhuang stand today as a magnificent library of spiritual art sparked by this flow. Persian music and instruments enchanted Chinese court elites. Nestorian Christians, Zoroastrians, and Islamic scholars later followed the path into the Tang and Song eras. Imagine that, a single thread of silk leading to a global web of theology, philosophy, and science. The Silk Road wasn't just a marketplace, it was a diplomatic corridor. Envoys from the Roman Empire arrived in China during the Eastern Han era, bearing gifts. According to Han records, in 166 CE, a delegation from Daqin, their term for the Roman Empire, reached Emperor Huan's court. While modern scholars debate whether these were official envoys or ambitious traders, the fact remains: East and West had touched, politically and personally. Artifacts found in Luoyang and Xi'an include Roman glassware and Middle Eastern coins, definitive proof of this ancient internationalism. Modern archaeologists like Dr. Victor Mayer, University of Pennsylvania, and teams from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences have uncovered stunning relics, mummified remains in the Darim Basin with Caucasian features, wearing European textiles, dating back to 1800 BCE. Roman coins discovered deep within China's borders. Persian manuscripts buried in Buddhist grottos. And perhaps most incredibly, a cache of documents known as the Dunhuang manuscripts, over 20,000 scrolls covering everything from astronomy to medicine to Taoist rituals. What they reveal is clear. The Silk Road was not just trade. It was civilization in motion. Even now, echoes of this route persist. China's modern Belt and Road Initiative is a reincarnation of this ancient endeavor. Xi'an, the ancient starting point, is once again being revitalized as a global logistics hub. Ask yourself, Could the modern world have evolved the same way without this ancient connection? So next time you see a silk scarf or sip tea from a porcelain cup, remember, these weren't just commodities. They were ambassadors of a global consciousness, carried across mountains and deserts by people who believed the world was bigger than themselves. And they were right. Imagine this. A golden throne room deep in the Forbidden City, lacquered walls shimmering with candlelight, yet behind the splendor, cracks are forming. The dynasty that once ruled with divine authority is now teetering on the edge. The sound of rebellion is not a distant echo. It's here, at the gates. Throughout China's long imperial history, the fall of a dynasty wasn't just the end of a reign. It was a cataclysm. Earthquakes of unrest that shattered the heavens. This is the story of what happens when emperors lose the mandate of heaven, and ordinary people, once bound by reverence, rise up. To understand how dynasties fell, you must first understand what kept them standing. The mandate of heaven. More than a political tool, it was a cosmic license. If floods, famine, or corruption spread, people didn't just see it as bad governance. They saw it as the will of heaven withdrawing its blessing. And it was this spiritual belief that fueled some of history's most dramatic revolts. Let's rewind to 209 BCE. A man named Chen Shang, a low-ranking soldier, was ordered to deliver troops. Delayed by flooding, he feared the punishment for tardiness would be death. Instead of running, he revolted. And so began the Dezexiang Uprising, the first peasant rebellion in Chinese history. His rallying cry? The king is no longer fit to rule. Fast forward to 184 CE. The Han Dynasty, once a symbol of strength and innovation, was staggering under the weight of court corruption and devastating plagues. In the countryside, a charismatic healer named Zhang Ju claimed he had received a vision from the heavens. His followers, millions of them, tied yellow cloth around their heads and took up arms. They weren't just fighting for food. They were fighting for spiritual salvation. The Yellow Turban Rebellion was both political and apocalyptic. Some of the earliest imperial military records describe how these rebels used coordinated guerrilla tactics, attacking supply lines and destabilizing provinces. The Han army, though mighty, was overwhelmed. At the National Museum of Chinese History, curators still preserve battered weapons and looted imperial seals from this period. Dr. Wen Jiahao, a leading expert from Peking University, calls it China's first ideological revolution, the collapse of the old world to birth the unknown. But it wasn't just the people outside the palace causing chaos. Inside, dynasties often collapsed from internal rot. The late Han dynasty was plagued by power struggles between court eunuchs, aristocrats, and child emperors manipulated like puppets. One tragic example, Emperor Ling of Han. Barely a teenager when crowned, he spent his rule trapped between feuding regents and corrupt ministers. Meanwhile, regional warlords grew stronger, like Cao Cao, a military genius who would later carve out the northern kingdom of Wei. The court fell into such disarray that during one infamous council meeting, opposing ministers drew swords on each other, in the emperor's presence. When archaeologists unearthed tombs from this era near Luoyang, they found charred remains of what was once the imperial archives, evidence of violent sieges and intentional destruction. A dynasty burning its own past to cover the shame of its downfall. The Tang dynasty, often considered the golden age of Chinese civilization, also met a violent end. At its peak, Tang emperors ruled from Vietnam to the edge of Persia. But in 755 AD, the powerful general in Lushan, once a favorite of the emperor, turned traitor. He led a revolt that nearly collapsed the empire overnight. Records from the Zizhi Tongjian, a historical chronicle compiled centuries later, describe how in Lushan marched on Chang'an, executing governors and burning whole cities. The emperor fled. The court panicked. For 8 long years, China spiraled into civil war. Death toll estimates? Between 13 to 36 million people, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. And here's where it gets interesting. Modern satellite archaeology has revealed scorched city foundations in Hebei province, matching the historical timelines of Lushan's raids. Dr. Li Xinxin from Tsinghua University led ground-penetrating radar scans confirming entire urban centers, never rebuilt, buried beneath farmland. Later, it was not rebellion from within, but invasion from beyond. The Song dynasty, masters of technology and commerce, faced an unstoppable force. The Mongols, led by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis. Despite their advanced weaponry, including early cannons, the Song court fractured under the pressure. In 1279 CE, at the Battle of Yamen, the last Song emperor, a 7-year-old boy, was carried by loyal generals onto a warship. As the fleet was destroyed around them, his regent, Lu Xiufu, chose honor over capture. He picked up the child emperor, wrapped him in royal silk, and leapt into the sea. This haunting moment was recorded by Yuan historians, passed down through generations. To this day, divers in the Pearl River Delta have recovered Song-era artifacts. Bronze seals, jade emblems, and broken porcelain, each a quiet witness to the dynasty's final breath. So, what causes a great civilization to fall? Is it corruption, climate change, religion, rebellion, or is it a pattern, an ancient script etched into the bones of history? Modern scholars are using machine learning to analyze dynastic records. Projects at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences are mapping 2,000 years of political, economic, and environmental data. The results? Rebellions spike after droughts. Dynasties collapse after fiscal mismanagement and weakened borders. In other words, the past has patterns. And China's story is a masterclass in cycles. Every time an empire fell, a new one rose. From ashes came ambition. From rebellion, rebirth. But not every secret of these collapses has been uncovered. Which begs the question, what ancient truths still lie buried beneath China's forgotten battlefields and burned palaces? Imagine walking the length of the terracotta army today, row after row of stone soldiers, each chiseled with care, each face subtly different, as if frozen mid-breath. What are they whispering across the centuries? History, at its core, isn't just about the past. It's about reflection. And as we stand on the shoulders of 5,000 years of Chinese civilization, the echoes of ancient dynasties like Qin, Han, and Tang don't just call us backward. They push us forward. From the monumental walls of Chang'an to the Great Wall itself, the Chinese dynasties were not afraid to think big. And perhaps the most staggering symbol of this audacity? The terracotta army. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the same ruler who unified the Chinese writing system and standardized weights and measures, built an entire shadow empire underground. Not out of whimsy, but out of ideology. He believed his reign, and the nation he forged, must continue into the afterlife. The scale of the project, employing over 700,000 laborers, challenges even today's construction marvels. Modern parallel? Think of Elon Musk building Mars colonies or global AI infrastructures. Vast, expensive, audacious. Qin's vision wasn't all that different. He believed that only by thinking beyond mortality could a ruler shape destiny. So here's the question. In our age of instant gratification, have we lost the will to build for centuries? Gunpowder, paper, the compass, seismographs. The ancient Chinese dynasties weren't merely rulers. They were stewards of scientific revolution. Take Zhang Heng of the Han Dynasty. He built the world's first earthquake detector in 132 CE, a bronze urn with 8 dragons whose mouths dropped balls into toads below to indicate the quake's direction. It was so precise that modern geologists were baffled when replicas proved it worked. How many modern minds know that the first ink recipe predates Gutenberg's press by over a millennium? That block printing came not from Europe, but from Tang China? Today's smartphones and satellites may trace their lineage back through Silicon Valley, but their DNA runs through the dusty libraries and ink-stained temples of ancient China. It wasn't just goods that flowed east to west along the Silk Road. It was ideas, diseases, religions, technologies, and dreams. Buddhism entered China not by conquest, but by curiosity. Glassware, exotic animals, astronomy, and even philosophical paradoxes traveled via camel and caravan. The Chinese dynasties mastered not just trade, but cultural fusion. Compare that to our internet-driven world of 24/7 exchange. The Silk Road was the world's first global network, minus fiber optics, but heavy on human connection. What does that tell us? that the future isn't forged in isolation. It's woven, like silk, through contact, exchange, and mutual fascination. Let's not forget the darker legacy. From the Qin's harsh legalism to the Tang's golden decadence, every dynasty eventually crumbled. Rebellion, corruption, climate shifts, famine, history's playbook rarely changes. The fall of the Han, for example, came not just from outside threats like the Xiongnu, but from within unique control of court politics, peasant revolts, and elite infighting. Sound familiar? Even in the wake of dynastic collapse, something remarkable happened. China rebuilt. Again, and again, and again. It wasn't about permanence. It was about resilience. Can modern powers say the same? Despite centuries of study, many secrets remain buried, literally. We still haven't opened Emperor Qin's actual tomb. Why? Because historical texts speak of deadly traps, mercury rivers, and intricate booby traps that make even Indiana Jones flinch. Chinese scientists using magnetic resonance imaging have confirmed high levels of mercury in the soil, just as the texts predicted. And yet, the tomb remains sealed. What lies inside? What could rewrite everything we know? Sometimes, the greatest wisdom is knowing when not to dig. The dynasties left no instruction manual, no video logs, no archives of how to rule a civilization for 1,000 years. But they left symbols, structures, stories, silks, scripts, and if we're listening closely enough, they left warnings, too. That over-centralization can rot from within. That technology can elevate or enslave. That culture is the real currency of power. And that human beings, even emperors, even gods on earth, are still just passing through. As we step out of the tomb, dust off the old scrolls, and trace our fingers along ancient ceramic, we don't just see history. We feel it. We carry it. Because it's not gone. It's not dead. The terracotta army still stands, not just to guard an emperor, but to remind us of what is possible when a civilization dreams beyond its time. And perhaps, in that silence beneath the earth, the past isn't whispering to us. It's waiting,